Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're tackling those massive sporting events that capture the world's attention. The Olympics, the World Cup, those kinds of
The
things.
ones that make you rearrange your whole schedule.
Yeah, exactly. And I know you're curious about the economics of these global spectacles.
There's a lot more to it than you might think.
Right. Way beyond just ticket sales and TV deals. So we've got a mountain of research and case studies here.
We're going to uncover the real deal.
We're going deep, deep down into the impact on host nations, the athletes themselves, those powerful sports organizations.
Even how it hits fans like you.
Exactly. Let's kick things off by talking about those countries lucky enough to host these mega events.
It's got to be a dream come true, right?
You think so? I mean, you're on the world stage,
Showcasing your nation.
all those tourists rolling in, spending big bucks.
Seems like a guaranteed economic boost.
Yeah, that's the image, but is it always the reality?
Well, it's definitely not a slam dunk, that's for sure.
Really?
Let's take the 2014 World Cup in Brazil as a case in point.
Okay, Brazil, huge soccer nation.
Absolutely.
Right.
They went all out, invested something like $11 billion.
Wow. For what?
Stadiums, airports, all kinds of upgrades.
Makes sense. Got to have the infrastructure.
Right, and those mega construction projects, they do create jobs, generate a buzz.
Short-term boost for sure.
But those long-term economic benefits, not always a sure thing.
So what happens when the party ends and the crowds go home?
Sometimes those fancy new stadiums, they become more like expensive souvenirs just sitting there.
Gathering dust.
You got it. Take the Arena da Amazônia in Manaus.
Never heard of it.
It costs millions to build, and now it's costing millions more just to maintain.
And it's barely used since the World Cup.
Nope. Economists actually have a term for these underused facilities. White elephants.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. A giant, expensive white elephant just kind of hanging around.
Exactly. And it highlights a really important point about these mega events.
What's that?
They can definitely spark temporary economic activity, but thinking about the long-term sustainability of all that investment, that's key.
Makes sense. So maybe building it doesn't always mean they will come in terms of lasting economic impact.
You got it.
But tourism, surely that's a clear win for the host countries.
It's a big factor, no doubt.
I mean, think about all those visitors from around the globe.
Exactly. Spending money on hotels, restaurants, souvenirs.
Yeah, everyone gets a piece of that pie.
Like the 2012 London Olympics. Almost 500,000 visitors.
Wow.
Dropped an estimated $2 billion.
Sounds pretty delicious to me. But I have a feeling there's a but coming.
There is. While some tourists are drawn to all the excitement of these events, others actually steer clear of the host cities.
Really? Why?
They get worried about overcrowding, inflated prices. It's a tough balance to strike.
So the tourism boost, not as automatic as you might think?
Not always. Now let's switch gears for a minute and talk about the potential for urban regeneration.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, sometimes these mega events can be a catalyst for some pretty amazing transformations.
Like a makeover for the city.
Exactly. The 1992 Barcelona Olympics is a classic example.
I have heard Barcelona's beautiful.
It is. They used the games as a chance to completely redo their waterfront,
Wow.
upgraded their transportation system, turned Barcelona into a modern, stunning destination.
So in that case, it sparks some lasting positive change.
Big time. But we also have to be realistic. These huge urban renewal projects, they can have some unintended consequences.
Such as?
Well, in some cities, these efforts have led to what we call displacement
Displacement
of low-income communities. These are people who've lived in these areas for years.
to get pushed out.
Yeah, it can happen. Neighborhoods get more expensive, start catering to a wealthier crowd.
So it's not all sunshine and roses.
Not always. It really raises important questions about who truly benefits from these mega events.
And who might get left behind.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're seeing the economic impact on the host nations is a bit of a mixed bag.
Definitely not a simple equation.
Some potential wins, but also some real challenges.
For sure.
Now let's shift our focus to the athletes themselves.
The stars of the show.
I imagine them, basking in glory, raking in those endorsement deals.
Yeah, for some, that's the reality. Think Usain Bolt.
Okay. Yeah, he's a global icon.
Right. Major sponsorships, Puma, Gatorade, even Hublot, the luxury watchmaker.
Wow. So for him, it's striking gold both on and off the field.
You got it. But for most athletes, the financial picture is not quite so glamorous.
Certainly.
The vast majority don't reach that level of fame and fortune.
So they're not all living the high life.
Not even close. And they often face immense pressure to perform at their absolute peak.
Because
Because their financial future depends on it. Contracts, sponsorships, it all rides on those wins.
It's easy to forget that these are real people, not just superhuman athletes.
Right. They have bills to pay, families to support.
And that pressure can take a toll.
It absolutely can. Remember Simone Biles at the Tokyo Olympics?
Yeah, when she withdrew from some of the events.
That was a powerful moment. She chose to prioritize her mental health.
Over all that pressure.
Exactly. It was a real wake-up call, highlighted the human cost of competing at that level.
Definitely shifted the conversation.
And it underscored the financial risks, too. If athletes don't perform, they risk losing those sponsorships.
Which could be devastating.
Absolutely. So yeah, those mega events might seem like a golden ticket to riches.
But the reality is much more complicated.
Much more.
Okay, so we've looked at the host nations, the athletes, but what about the organizations behind these events?
The big players, the IOC, FIFA.
Yeah, they're bringing in billions from broadcasting rights, ticket sales.
You're telling me?
Where does all that money go?
Well, the IOC, for example, they generated about $4 billion just from broadcasting rights for the 2016 Rio Olympics.
Whoa, that's more than some countries' entire economies.
It's a massive, massive business. And FIFA, they earn similar figures from the World Cup.
So where's it all going?
Some of it does go towards funding future events, administrative costs.
Keeps the lights on.
Right, and they do fund various development programs. But how these profits are distributed, well, that's raised some ethical concerns.
Like what?
For instance, FIFA keeps a big chunk of those World Cup earnings,
Really?
leaving a relatively small percentage for the host countries.
So the host countries shoulder a lot of the financial burden, but they don't reap the full financial rewards.
That's a point of contention, for sure.
Doesn't seem very fair.
And then there's the whole issue of financial transparency within these organizations.
Okay, what do you mean?
Remember the 2015 FIFA corruption scandal?
Vaguely.
It exposed a whole web of bribery, shady dealings.
Not a good look.
Not at all. It really highlighted the need for greater accountability and transparency in how these billions of dollars are managed.
Yeah, we need to know where the money's going.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the host nations, the athletes, the big organizations, but let's not forget about us. Yeah, we're the ones filling those stadiums, creating that electric atmosphere.
You're the heart and soul of these events.
But we feel the economic pinch too, right?
You bet. Attending a mega event, it's a bucket list experience for many.
Absolutely.
But it comes at a cost. Ticket prices, they've skyrocketed.
Oh, yeah. I've seen the crazy numbers.
Take the 2019 Super Bowl, for example.
Okay.
Average ticket price was over $4,000.
$4,000 for one ticket.
Yep. Raises some serious questions about inclusivity.
Yeah, are these mega events becoming exclusive playgrounds for the wealthy?
That's a valid concern. Are average fans getting priced out?
And if they are, what does that mean for the whole fan experience?
Big questions.
It's not just about the ticket prices either. What about the impact on the communities where these events are held?
Another crucial piece of the puzzle. Sadly, sometimes those mega events, they can make existing social problems worse.
Such as?
Displacement, gentrification.
We touched on that earlier.
Right. Think about the favela evictions in Rio leading up to the 2016 Olympics.
I remember hearing about that.
Thousands of residents forced from their homes.
To make way for the games.
It's a really complex issue. We have to be mindful of those social costs.
Advocate for policies that benefit everyone.
Not just the elite few.
Okay, so we've covered the economic impact on the host nations, the athletes, the organizations, even us fans.
We've been around the field.
But we can't ignore the elephant in the room, the environmental impact.
Yeah, that's a big one.
All that construction, global travel, energy consumption.
It all adds up to a massive carbon footprint.
How massive are we talking?
The 2008 Beijing Olympics, for instance, generated over 1.2 million tons of CO2 emissions.
1.2 million tons. That's hard to even imagine.
It is. But the good news is there's been a push towards more sustainable practices in recent years.
Like what?
The 2020 Tokyo Olympics, they used recycled materials in their medals.
Oh, that's cool.
And they built energy-efficient stadiums.
So some positive steps in the right direction.
Definitely. But we have to go further. We need to be thinking about post-event environmental degradation.
What happens after the party's over?
Exactly. What happens to all those stadiums, those infrastructure projects?
Do they just get abandoned?
Sometimes, yeah. And then they become eyesores, environmental hazards.
So it's not just about being green during the event. It's about what happens afterward, too.
It's a life cycle approach to sustainability.
Okay, so clearly the economic impact of these mega sporting events is a complex issue.
It's multifaceted, interconnected.
And to really understand it, I think we need to dive into some real-life examples.
Let's get specific.
Case studies that show us how all these factors play out in the real world.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
So first stop, we're heading to London, host of the 2012 Summer Olympics.
London, often considered a success story.
In terms of economic impact.
Both economic and in terms of urban regeneration. But as with everything, there's more to the story.
Well, let's unpack it. What made London's experience unique?
And what lessons can we learn from both their successes and their challenges?
I'm ready to dive in.
Well, one thing that set London apart was their long-term vision. They weren't just focused on those 2 weeks of competition.
They were thinking bigger picture.
Exactly. They saw the Olympics as an opportunity to attract investment, boost tourism, create jobs, and not just temporary construction gigs.
They wanted those lasting benefits.
Absolutely. And they actually did pretty well. Government reports show that the London Olympics generated almost £10 billion in trade and investment.
Not too shabby.
Not at all. They also used the Games to revitalize a part of London that had been struggling, the East End.
I've heard that area's really changed.
It has. They built the Olympic Park there, new housing, businesses.
It sounds like they really leveraged those games for urban renewal.
They did. But of course, there were some challenges, too.
Like what?
Well, concerns were raised about gentrification.
We talked about that before.
Right. Rising property values and influx of more upscale businesses can sometimes push out longtime residents.
Yeah, displacement, it's a real concern.
It is. It's a reminder that even when you have these positive changes,
You have to be mindful of the impact on everyone.
make sure the benefits are shared, not just concentrated among the wealthy.
Definitely a balancing act.
It is. Okay, so now let's jump over to a very different setting. The 2014 FIFA World Cup in Brazil.
Brazil. The land of soccer.
And samba.
Huge national pride. I bet the atmosphere was electric.
It was, and Brazil definitely saw a significant bump in tourism revenue. But Brazil also became a textbook example of those white elephant projects.
Those underused stadiums.
Yep. Despite spending billions, several of those brand new stadiums ended up being barely used after the tournament.
So not the economic windfall they were hoping for.
Not exactly. And beyond the financial concerns, there were some serious social repercussions.
Okay, like what?
Well, remember how we talked about displacement?
Yep.
Well, in Brazil, several low-income communities were displaced to make way for all that World Cup infrastructure.
People forced out of their homes.
It happened, and it sparked a lot of debate about the true cost of these mega events.
Whether those short-term gains are worth the long-term impact on communities.
It's a tough question. Okay, now let's fast forward to a more recent and maybe even more controversial event.
More controversial than Brazil.
Potentially. We're talking about the 2022 World Cup in Qatar.
Qatar. Yeah, that one was surrounded by controversy from the start.
You're telling me everything from the bidding process to the extreme heat-raised eyebrows?
And the whole issue of human rights.
Exactly. A lot of people questioned Qatar's labor practices, especially the treatment of migrant workers.
Those were some pretty serious allegations.
They were. And then there's a financial aspect. Qatar reportedly spent a jaw-dropping $220 billion on infrastructure and preparations.
$220 billion on one World Cup.
It's widely considered the most expensive World Cup in history. They built new stadiums, an entire metro system, expanded their airport.
It's hard to even comprehend that kind of spending.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions, right?
Like, was it worth it? What kind of long-term economic benefits can they realistically expect from that kind of investment?
Good questions. And what about the environmental impact of all that construction?
Yeah, that's got to be significant.
And then there's the whole ethical debate about holding a major sporting event in a country with a questionable human rights record.
It seems like Qatar's experience really highlights the need to think carefully about where these mega events are held.
To consider not just the financial aspects, but also the ethical, social, and environmental implications.
To do our due diligence.
Exactly. Okay, so we've looked at 3 very different case studies.
London, Brazil, Qatar.
Each with its own set of successes and challenges.
And a lot of lessons to be learned.
Definitely. And I think what's really striking is that there's a growing awareness.
Awareness of what?
Of the need to approach these mega events in a more responsible, sustainable way.
People are starting to ask those tough questions.
They are. And they're demanding more transparency, more accountability from the organizations involved.
So there's a shift happening.
I think so. People are realizing that the old model, the mega events, are always good for the economy model. It's not that simple.
It's more complicated than that.
Much more. There's a growing recognition that these events can have real social and environmental costs.
Costs that we need to consider.
Absolutely. So the question becomes, how do we move forward? How do we make these events more sustainable, more equitable?
How do we maximize the benefits and minimize the harm?
Those are the million-dollar questions, and that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, deep divers. We're just getting started.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the big questions, aren't they? Is it all worth it in the end?
Yeah, it's a question we all need to grapple with.
We see those amazing athletic feats, the global camaraderie,
It's inspiring.
but then we hear about the displacement, the environmental concerns, the financial risks.
It's a lot to weigh.
So how do we, as fans, as global citizens, approach these mega events? How do we make informed decisions about our participation?
Well, I think step one is acknowledging the complexity.
Right, moving away from those black and white pronouncements.
Yeah, mega events are always good or mega events are always bad. Those are oversimplifications.
The reality is much more nuanced.
Each event is unique with its own context, its own set of circumstances.
And it's our job as engaged citizens to look beyond the hype.
to dig deeper to understand the full picture.
So what are some practical things we can do? I mean, it feels like these events are driven by these massive forces, global organizations, corporate sponsors.
They are powerful players, no doubt. But we, as individuals, we're not powerless.
Okay, so what can we do?
We can start by educating ourselves.
Doing our own research?
Exactly. Reading critical analyses, engaging in thoughtful discussions.
Not just accepting the official narrative.
Right. And then we can use our voices
To speak up.
to raise awareness, to demand transparency from those in power.
Holding them accountable.
Absolutely. We can also support athletes who are using their platform to advocate for positive change.
Like Simone Biles, speaking out about mental health.
Yeah, she's a great example.
Or athletes pushing for more sustainable practices.
Right. And we can make conscious choices as consumers.
Meaning what?
Well, do we really need to buy that latest World Cup jersey made by a company with questionable labor practices?
Ah, so thinking about the ethical implications of our purchases.
Yeah, voting with our wallets.
I like that.
And when we do attend these events, we can try to minimize our environmental impact.
Using public transport, reducing waste, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Even small actions can add up.
So it's a multifaceted approach.
It is. It's about being informed, being engaged, and being mindful of the impact of our choices.
It sounds like you're saying that change ultimately starts with us as individuals.
It does. We need to shift the culture, the expectations.
And we can do that through our actions, our voices, our choices.
Precisely.
Okay. So, to wrap up this deep dive, any final thoughts for our listeners?
The next time you're caught up in the thrill of a mega sporting event, take a moment to pause, to reflect.
To think critically.
Yeah, to ask those hard questions, to consider the full picture.
The economic, the social, the environmental.
And then use that knowledge to make informed decisions.
To be a part of the solution.
Exactly.
So deep divers, thanks for joining us on this exploration of the economics of mega sporting events.
It's been a fascinating journey.
I know I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too.
We've covered a lot of ground, but the conversation doesn't end here.
Keep thinking critically. Keep asking questions.
Keep pushing for a more sustainable, equitable, and inspiring future for these global spectacles.
And until next time, keep diving deep.